reflecting on intrinsic capacity, let me talk about adults for a second. For how many of you have people in your family who have presbycusis, which is hearing loss due to aging? Do you have any aging members of your family who you know aren't hearing very well? How many of them have hearing aids? How many of you wish they had hearing aids? Yeah. Do they use their hearing aids? Okay, right. So here's something, as we discuss intrinsic, extrinsic. As we get older, we all lose some of our intrinsic capacity. Like it or not, we start unraveling. Starting with the prefrontal cortex, folks, which has to do with executive control, which is inhibiting inappropriate behaviors and advanced planning. Remembering. So we start losing, we all do, hopefully not much, but we lose some of our intrinsic capacity. Now, as we lose the doorway, as it starts decreasing over time, what happens is the brain receives less stimulation, and the brain is already losing some of its capacity. So current studies are showing a very strong correlation between unmanaged hearing loss and dementia. Yes, it's a correlational. So what we don't know is there an underlying comorbidity, or is it the fact, remember how we talked how critical it is to stimulate that brain with sound, so critical that we don't have earlids, so critical that the fetus has access to sound for 20 weeks. That's how critical. Well, as we get older, the brain still craves auditory stimulation. So when we have a brain that is already starting to lose some of its zing, and then we don't stimulate it, that seems to exacerbate cognitive decline. So what our current thinking is as soon as people start experiencing hearing loss, you get hearing aids right away. And I don't sell hearing aids, so it's not about me selling, but it's about your brain. Because here's the deal, the hearing aid will not stop presbycusis. The hearing aid will not stop a progressive hearing loss. But what will the hearing aid do? It'll hang on to your brain. It'll keep your brain stimulated. It will hang on to your cognitive capacity, which is very, very important. See, often people out there think, well, I'm just going to tough it out and I'm just not going to give in to this hearing loss, and without realizing that the hearing loss isn't about this. The hearing loss is about the brain. And when we don't stimulate the brain, there are cognitive challenges. And so now stimulating the brain doesn't mean dementia will not occur. It could occur because it could be a separate pathological process. However, the more the brain is stimulated, the better. Also, the sooner we start stimulating the brain when the doorway starts closing, the easier the brain will adapt. See, if we go decades of having less and less sound through the doorway to the brain has reorganized itself around a diminished signal. You lose your auditory capacity, some of it. And then you put the hearing aid back in to a brain that has been rewired to a deficient signal. And what does that brain say? Does the brain like that signal? No, the brain hates it. And people say, this hearing aid is awful. All these sounds are coming through it. Well, what happens is the brain can no longer manage those sounds. You're going to have to wear that hearing aid a lot to regrow some of those neurons that get away from you by lack of stimulation. So if you stimulate that brain right away, you can hang on to that auditory capacity and, as much as possible, the cognitive capacity. Because as you get older, if you have a reduced extrinsic signal and reduced intrinsic capacity, you have a person who has a great deal of difficulty functioning. a lot of difficulty functioning. So we want to support our aging members of our family about why they need to get good access to their brain. Very, very important. That intrinsic, extrinsic balance. So now speech intelligibility variables. Oh, let me go back to the hearing loss thing, because what people don't realize, and why it's often difficult to speak with a family member about you really need to get your hearing aids and why they think it's not a problem, is because, number one, you don't know what you're not hearing. So your family member says, I hear everything. You hear everything that you hear. You have no idea what you're not hearing because you're not hearing it, but I know what you're not hearing because I've been trying to talk to you. So when a person, hearing loss is a whole community, it's a family thing. Because if the person who has hearing loss, this adult, is not taking responsibility for it, it makes everyone else in their world work hard. So when everyone else works hard, it causes resentment. It also has people communicating less. If it's hard to communicate with you, I'm just not going to do it so much. I don't mean to be mean. I don't even, in a metacognitive way, consider that I don't want to talk to you because it's really difficult. I just don't. So then you get even less stimulation, less social encounters, fewer opportunities to exercise your brain. So let me give you an example. My husband has had hearing loss. Don't tell him. No, he's had it for like 25 years. And he's had a hearing aid, probably he's had it for 30 years at least, but he's had a hearing aid for 20 years. But it took at least 10 years to get a hearing aid on him. And here's why. No one else in his world told him how much he was missing, except me. Yeah. So his view was that it was my problem. Because everyone else, see, other people except family members feel rude saying to someone, no, it's the fourth time I've tried to tell you that and you still didn't get it. We don't say that to people we don't know so well because that's really rude. But what happens then is you think you got it. And I'm accommodating you. Whether or not I know it's hearing loss or I think, ooh, you used to be so sharp. Whether it's that, who knows what people think, but they know that you're not getting it. So I was telling my husband for a long time, you're really missing a lot. Oh, you just have bionic ears. No, so far I can just kind of hear and you're having a problem. So he's a professor of special education. So what finally tipped him over the edge is a student who was very soft-spoken and had a thick accent. She was from India, came up to him in tears and said, why don't you like me? And he said, what are you talking about? She said, I raise my hand in class, you never call on me. I come up to you and you just walk away. She was very soft-spoken with a thick accent. He couldn't hear her if she came up behind him. And he wasn't actively not calling on her in class, but if he thought about it, he didn't because he couldn't hear her.
Maybe glasses.
Yeah, right, probably did. Yeah. So he came home that night and said, I need hearing aids now. He said, I thought it was you. I thought this was your problem. It is me, isn't it? He said. I said, yes, but it's 10 o'clock at night. We can't get hearing aids. I need them now. So when he finally got it, but here's what happens within a family. So when he has his hearing aids on, he can mostly hear from one room to the next. But without his hearing aids, he can. It's a moderate to a moderately severe sloping hearing loss. He cannot hear from one room to the next. So if he doesn't have his hearing aids on, we're having a conversation and then I think we're done. And so I leave the room and he says something. Now, I can still hear him in another room. He can't hear my answer. So I either ignore him or I walk back to the room and we have another conversation. And are we done? I said, okay. Then I walk away and he says something again. So I finally come back and say, would you please put on your hearing aids? You're making me work way harder than I'm interested in working. And depending on how I feel will determine how I actually express that, But hearing loss impacts the whole family. And so to the level that the person is willing to take advantage or to take responsibility for it, I really wish that I really want to give him an FM because he loves to somehow talk from another room. And if he only had if I had an FM, we could do that all the time. But that's another thing that family members don't understand, is that by them refusing to take responsibility for their hearing loss, they're putting a burden on everyone else. And that burden causes resentment, and at the very least, it causes reduced communication, which is a very bad thing in terms of their brain. It's their brain. So those of us who are getting older, be responsible for that hearing. Make sure your brain gets stimulated. Presbycusis is typically worse in the higher frequencies, with better hearing remaining in the lows. So therefore, men are easier to hear.
So they're not getting that feedback from men.
Right, so they're not getting the feedback from men. Exactly. That's right. And so it's usually from their wives, who they can ignore anyway. Right. So now, speech and even the variability of speech intelligibility occurs also because of the frequency range within a particular word. I mean, sounds vary in frequency from 250 hertz, which is middle C on the piano, all the way up to 8,000 hertz, and in loudness by at least 30 dB. The loudest vowel in English is ah, and the softest consonant is voiceless TH. That's softer than S. Although the voiceless consonants are all pretty soft, but voiceless TH wins in terms of how soft. So you have it, even if you keep your voice at a very consistent level, there's going to be at least 30 dB of difference within a single word. So that's how you have a lot of variability in intelligibility. And we always have to consider communication in the context of a very rich soundscape.